Speaking of ancestors, this is a poem I wrote for my mother. I have scoliosis, which many people do. It's just a curvature of the spine. Mine happens to be somewhat significant. And so when I was a kid, most of my life, my mom drove me to physical therapy to try to make sure I could walk. This is a poem about that moment. The Raincoat. When the doctor suggested surgery and a brace for all my youngest years, my parents scrambled to take me to massage therapy, deep tissue work, osteopathy, and soon my crooked spine unspooled a bit. I could breathe again and move more in a body unclouded by pain. My mom would tell me to sing songs to her the whole 45-minute drive to Middle Two Rock Road and 45 minutes back from physical therapy. She'd say that even my voice sounded unfettered by my spine afterward, so I sang and sang because I thought she liked it. I never asked her what she gave up to drive me or how her day was before this chore. Today, at her age, I was driving myself home from yet another spinal appointment, singing along to some maudlin but solid song on the radio. And I saw a mom take her raincoat off and give it to her young daughter when a storm took over the afternoon. My God, I thought, my whole life I've been under her raincoat, thinking it's somehow a marvel that I never got wet. Thank you.
Absolutely amazing. We were talking about this when we read it together as a group, and we were like, none of us cry during it. We gotta work. But yeah, also I like things I like to put in the chat are how amazing the artist is. So please do that. But yeah, we have questions for you, but I'm actually curious, Ada, you mentioned before that sometimes before you read it, you like to say some stuff about the poem. I'm kind of curious, like, what do you usually like to preface the poem with?
So what I usually say is that I was born with scoliosis, and my curvature makes it so that some people don't have an extreme curvature. Mine is fairly extreme. And so it makes me, even as a kid, I was in a lot of pain. And so there was a lot of different suggestions as to what they wanted to do in order to fix and rectify that situation. And my parents were, even though they were very busy and not super wealthy, were able to take me to appointments and try to be really proactive on trying to mitigate my pain levels and work for my own health. And it wasn't really until I was, much older where this poem takes place, where I had that moment of realizing what it was to be so profoundly looked after in a way that is often taken for granted.
And I'm curious, because you mentioned like that's the moment in the poem where it's like you see the raincoat. Is that also where the poem started for you? Or was the idea of the poem there before or after, or did it come sometime later? I'm curious where that began.
I love that question. And I think that for me, I do a lot of truth telling in my poems. And I always laugh that I'll say like the speaker, and I'm like, it's me. So it was me. The speaker is me. Everything that happened in that last part of the poem is how the poem got triggered into its reality, which was I was driving home from seeing a physical therapist, and actually I had this moment of like, oh my God, my whole life I've been doing this. And I kind of, those moments where you have the tiny violin and you're just like, oh, I'm just going to set it on my dashboard and play this music and just like listen to my tiny violin of my sad story. And I had this sort of going in my head about
how many appointments I had and how I had to keep up with all my back health and all these different things I had to do and what insurance would cover and what I had to pay out of pocket and all of these things. And then as I'm having these thoughts, I see this mother, and that, you know, in Kentucky, I don't know if it's similar to, actually it is similar to where you are. It will just downpour, and like you think it's just a drizzle, and suddenly you're like, oh no, like it is like a deluge. And Kentucky is like that. And so I saw this mother and her child walking, and her child was maybe 4 or 5, quite young. And as soon as it happened, the mom just took her raincoat off and covered her daughter, like her whole head, right? So it was like a, you know, umbrella. And that was happening while I was having this little sort of inner pity party about my own health. And I thought, oh, wait, I actually haven't been doing this my whole life, right? Before that, for 18 years before that, it was my parents, and particularly my mom, that was being very proactive in trying to keep me healthy. And it was just that little movement. And then I thought, ooh, can I turn it into a poem? And I thought, I'm just going to put it in my notebook and see if I can sit with it. And then it wasn't until the drive came to me that it wasn't just about the appointment itself, but the trip to and fro, that I knew that I could get into the poem.
Yeah, I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, the poem does have a kind of like almost story return where you begin going and return back. Amazing poet things. I'm also now curious, like now that I know it's a real, because I feel like sometimes, you know, poets are like, I was standing in the rain, but it was like, were you? But now that I know it's a real moment, but now that it's a real moment, I'm curious, like afterwards, did you like also like, along with like figuring out you were gonna write a poem, like call your mom, or like, I don't know what comes with that kind of realization.
Yeah. I want to say also, I do feel like it is, when I say the speaker is me, I feel like that's something that I can reveal, but I do think as a respect and in a classroom, in a teaching setting, it's always good to not assume that the speaker is the same as the poet. And I know that's happening in the chat, and I just wanted to point that out, because I feel like I can divulge that, but it's not something we should presume as readers, right? Which is great. And Kenny was just pointing that out, that he didn't presume it actually happened, or that it was me, right?
I'm very, I don't trust easily.
Yeah. We're like, yeah. So I feel like one of the things that because my mother and I have a strong relationship, and because she's an artist, I mean, she knows that she's loved, but I think that giving a poem as a gift is really quite powerful. And so I didn't just share it, like didn't just call her and be like, I saw this thing and it made me think of you. Instead, you know, and I think it helps, again, that she's an artist and that she knows the power of creation, and she knows what it is to make something. And so to make something in honor of her was a gift. And so, in fact, I had 2 poems that I had written for her, and I kind of saved them. And then I thought, okay, I better send them to her. And at one point I didn't hear back, and it actually scared me. I thought, like, maybe she doesn't like these poems, or maybe that, you know, they're too revealing, or something I didn't know. And then she texted me, and she's like, I'm sobbing. And I was like, okay, good. Okay. In a good way, right? Like in a good way. But yeah, no, I didn't do the thing where it was like, oh, let's just have a conversation, which we talk all the time. So it's not like that, but it was more about, I know how much she values the act of artistry and what goes into it. And because of that, I really thought like the making of it was part of the gift.
And, you know, I can only imagine how affirming and how wonderful it must have felt for her to like see this acknowledgement that, like, you know, like everything she's done is being acknowledged by her daughter, and like how rewarding that kind of feeling can be. And, you know, especially like the way you end the poem, kind of talking about how much you've just never even considered that you were always under a raincoat.
Right.
And that was definitely a very kind of gut, like gut punching, relatable, and very blunt way of kind of articulating, like, always kind of realize how much people are protecting you from the many harms that the world can kind of give you. And I think something that was more subtle that I was curious, and one of our audience members was curious about, is the line where you say, you know, I sang because I thought she liked it.
Yeah.
Something that this person was very curious about is, you know, like, was this, you know, a form of appreciation, or were you trying to appear cheerful? Just very curious about like what your thought process was behind that line.
Yeah. I love that question, by the way. I think that there's two parts to it. One is the truth behind it, and the other is sort of the craft behind it, right? And so those sort of go hand in hand. And well, if you're lucky, they go hand in hand. And in this particular instance, I was. It is true. I would sing. She actually would love it if I sang. You know, I think our car radio was busted, you know, and so we didn't have music. So she would be like, and I had, you know, a crazy, as many poets do, have a crazy memory for lyrics. And so I would just be like, oh, what song do you want to hear? And she'd yell out a song and I would sing it. And after the appointment, she said that my voice sounded better. Like it sounded like it was fuller. And because, you know, the curvature and the muscle tightness really would make for constricting sound. And so I think it wasn't about being cheerful, but it was about occupying, like doing what she wanted to do, which was like, I would be her sort of human jukebox if she wanted me to sing. But then also, like, I remember that as like her wanting me to sing. And then of course, the other part of it is like, did she want me to sing, or was she sort of putting up with a young girl singing, you know? Like, what is the truth of that? Like in my head, I'm like, you know, because I thought she would, you know, and I look at that and go, like, do you really want your 12-year-old daughter to be just singing nonstop? I don't know. So, you know, I think that there's a little play with that. And then the other craft element of that is that I sang and sang goes back to the craft of writing the poem, right? And I think because this was a making of the art for her, there is a part of it where there is an awareness of, so I sang and sang because I thought she liked it, which is the singing is the voice of the poem. So those are the sort of three elements.
It's beautiful. Also, this question, we could have saved it for later, but I'm curious now that you said it. You mentioned that you would sing the songs and you had a lot memorized. Was there ever a favorite song that you would sing as a kid that you feel like you would always come back to?
You know, it's so hard. There were so many, and it was like sort of whatever I was obsessed with. I was as a kid, and this is going to make me sound like such a hippie, but I was obsessed with, like, you know, folk songs, of course. But then I was also like really obsessed with Aretha Franklin. And so a lot of the songs I was singing were Aretha Franklin songs, which of course I was butchering. I mean, clearly not skilled in any way, shape, or form to take on an Aretha Franklin song, but I'm sure I gave it my all.
That's the best you can. I think, in your defense, I think most people who sing Aretha Franklin songs are in a way butchering it. If it's just Aretha, that's. I guess we should not talk just about past songs, because we have a few other questions. Some of them coming from some more of our audience. So this next question is coming to us from a student from Claremont High School. I'm going to butcher your name, so I'm so sorry. Sonali Gunawardana? I apologize. Take me out of here after this. But they wanted to know, how do you write the physical and emotional vulnerability depicted in your poems? Do you censor them at all or write freely? And what advice would you give on that to someone just starting to write poems? And I think this just, when you were talking about, or we were talking about the lines, how much you pack in a single line, like the sang and sang and the voice there. How do you go about crafting that voice, and how do you go about making that voice a vulnerable one?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I am able to do now that I'm a little older, or now that I've been writing for 21 years, is that, or longer, is that I feel like I can ask myself now if I'm being vulnerable for the sake of something that I need. Like, is it transformative to me? Is it important to me? Or am I being vulnerable and authentic in a way that is trauma inducing or manipulative? And so for me, I'm always, if I'm interested in vulnerability, I have to be interested in all the elements of vulnerability, which also means that, you know, to approach that poem, I have to be aware, like, it starts with my body, but the poem is not about my body. The poem is actually a recognition of the fact that someone else has been taking care of me for so long and still does. And so I was able to sort of work through that vulnerability, that it didn't feel like I was performing some sort of act of trauma, or, you know, like, even if it's like, we call it like the pain porn, you know, I didn't want that to be the case. So I wanted to be very specific that this, and I hope that is, you know, I say the word pain, but it's never divulged in terms of like used gratuitously. And so I think the biggest self-awareness I have when it comes to vulnerability is making sure that I am being vulnerable in order to get to my own truth, in order to get to something larger, in order to get to something that's important, versus something that may have an impact on somebody else. Not that I don't want to have an impact on someone else. I do. I want to connect, but I want to connect with myself first in a true and honest way, and expose something that may surprise me, have a moment that surprises me. And in doing that, I think I can stay true to that vulnerability.
Wow. I think that's a part of me was like, you were saying that. And if you haven't read, well, firstly, we're going to tell you to do this later, but go find a Ada Limon book first. Then after you do that, find the blurb for the book. And if you hadn't, we've read a lot of your blurbs, like getting ready for this. And a lot of them just like go very much into like, this poet is so raw. This poet is so vulnerable. And I think it's interesting you're saying now that like it's not just about being as vulnerable as you can, or about throwing everything at it. And I'm curious, because, you know, we also have a lot of writers in the room. When did you learn that lesson, or when did that like come into your mind to like, oh, like there are things for me, or like I love what you use, like full circle vulnerability.
Right. I think for me, it's that I'm a very loving person, and I'm a very empathetic person, and I'm a very open person, but I'm also deeply suspicious. And I am very suspicious of art that feels manipulative. And I think that sometimes we can sort of like use our vulnerability to manipulate, and use our sort of like, I'm going to show you all of my wounds. You know, it's that sort of equivalent of like the beautiful Instagram photo of someone, and then she's like, just having a really hard day, and I want to be open with you. And you're like, or did you just want to share a beautiful picture of yourself? Like, maybe just share a beautiful picture of yourself. That's okay. And so I feel like I'm just very suspicious of what we are actually doing that in poems, because I want to make sure that, I mean, I love performance, right? I love the idea of connecting, but I'm very suspicious of performative manipulation that feels like we're using our traumas, our pain, or our personal, you know, mistakes even, to shift and change someone's emotional register without actually doing the work. And I think that when you learn how to do it, when you know your own tricks as a poet, you know how to do it. You're like, oh, I could give you a poem that can make you cry. Like, I could go from point A to point B, we could get there, you could feel it. And once you see enough poems, you go to enough readings, go to enough, oh, there's actually a formula for this. You can do this. The real trick, right? The real gift is to let all that go and just make work that matters. It matters to you, matters to the people around you. Like, this was a poem I wrote that moved me for my mother. There's a reason it had impact. It wasn't for other people. And I think that sort of intimacy and that connection is something that I was made very aware of. I would say just maybe 10 or 15 years ago, where I was like, oh, and it was just because I had read so much and been to so many things that you can see it. And I was aware of it in myself, that I was like, oh, I know the things that I could do, right? You become aware of your own tricks, your own, like, oh, I know that if I repeat something 3 times at the end, I can wow a crowd. Like, you're like, okay, maybe I should pull back and come back to what brought me here in the first place. And what brought me to the page for this poem in the first place was deep and utter gratitude to a woman that I don't say thank you enough to. And that is an authentic feeling, not I'm going to make a poem that performs gratitude, but this is gratitude.
Ada, the way you have turned me into a bobblehead right now, I'm feeling everything. Like, it is so what, like, these are feelings I feel like I don't hear verbalized a lot. And so the way you just kind of captured that, like, it's incredibly refreshing. And it's a very great reminder to kind of always remember, like, what is your purpose as you're making this work? And do not stray for the trauma porn. And I feel like, I wonder, like, is this a way to kind of help people kind of handle themselves with care as they're expressing their most vulnerable pieces of themselves in their art, in their poetry? And yeah, just kind of like, how do you kind of handle yourself with care as you're kind of expressing such raw emotions?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think self-care is massively important in creative writing. And I think it's unfortunately not spoken about as much as it should be. Like, I don't think that we have a harm reduction model for creative writing, and I think we should. And I'm always, like, sort of blown away. And I don't know if you felt this way in the past, but you go into a creative writing classroom, and I've been in that classroom where someone says, like, okay, we're just going to delve into, like, your deepest, darkest experience. And, like, I remember thinking, like, unless you're paying for my therapy after this, I don't think I want to do that. Like, that's not okay. And so I feel like I always tell my students, like, I know that hard experiences, we read poems about hard experiences and can be completely devastated and moved and obliterated in the best and most true way. But that doesn't mean that every poem has to be about a devastating experience. And it also doesn't mean that poetry can't be about praise, honoring, gratitude, joy, witnessing. And I feel like unless you're ready to go down into the bottom of the well, don't go down into the bottom of the well. And if you're ready, I know, this is how I know you're ready to go down to the bottom of the well, is that you brought your own ladder with you because you know that you can get back out. And if you don't have that ladder, don't go down there, because there's no one who wants us to re-traumatize ourselves, not our teachers, not our loved ones, not our inner child. Like, no one needs to be re-traumatized. And I feel like so much of that is like, okay, how do we protect ourselves? And I don't know, I'm a big proponent of, and I feel like we've been laughing about the words vulnerability, authenticity, and self-care is also, all of these words are like such buzzwords right now that they're driving me nuts. And I feel like as poets, we need to come up with different words for them. So I just want to say, like, harm reduction, like, bring the ladder. And I also think that sometimes we think we may be ready to write a poem, or someone is like, oh, you should really write about that. Someone might even tell us, like, oh, you had this terrible experience, you should really write about it. You can write about it as a way of processing. You don't have to publish it. You don't have to share it. You can walk out to a burn pile and burn it and be like, oh, look, I did some really good work inside. And then at some point, I might be ready to share that work with more people. And I just think we don't talk about that enough, because I think it's a huge topic and we need to protect ourselves. We need to protect our young folks who are starting creative writing. And they see, right, a lot of performances that are really tough, dealing with really tough things. And all of that's wonderful, but they need to know that the real professionals, the people who can get themselves through, have done the work to be able to talk about those subjects, aren't just going in cold. So yeah, I think it's really important. I love that you brought that up, because I think it's really true.
I mean, this is just incredible advice. Like, I'm just, wow, what fantastic. Like, Kenny is, I wish you could just see what I'm feeling internally. I'm just like, wow, like, yes. Like, people keep referencing how you say, like, bring your own ladder.
Yeah, you've got to.
As I kind of sulk into like this gold, I think we're at that time where we bring Joseph on and do a commercial break, because I got to process all this gold you just.
So Milka's gonna go process, and Ada, you will have a second to drink some water or do whatever. 5 minutes.
Oh wow!
I didn't even.
Waters. Whoa! It's the preparation for me. Wow. 2.
Hydration station.
But yeah, Joseph, would you like to come up and tell us?
Yeah, I am back, and I would like to share stuff. Let me get my screen ready. All right.
Forgive me, Joseph.
Forgive me. I definitely did not see this coming at the moment. I was still like arranging stuff on my screen. So this is just a real moment. We're just having a real moment.
And I think if Joseph gets his screen ready, we'll start putting Ada's social media in the chat. You all should definitely follow her, add her. And if you're lucky, she might add you back.
Whoa.
All right. So commercials, things that you should need to know. And I'm actually going to take y'all off spotlight so you can actually breathe for a second. This is only going to take me about 1.5 minutes, so don't go too far.
I'm going to go downstairs.
Some really cool things happening that you might want to know about. There's nothing behind that door. Don't tell people that there is.
This door is a prop, guys. I chose the door. Okay.
All right. So other things going on at LMSVoice. So this is Poetry Month. For the entire month, we have been working with an organization here in DC. It is called the Potter's House. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a great coffee shop. If you're ever in the area, you should definitely stop by. It's been there for like 80 some odd years. And they're also a nonprofit. So we've been doing these weekly writing workshops called Becoming Conscious. And it's just each theme was focused on healing in some way. And the culminating open mic is tomorrow night. And if you can, everyone see this? Is it the right direction on your paper, on your thing? Awesome. So you just go to Potter's House DC. They have their events page there, and you can click on that. You can follow us on social media, and we'll put those hashtags and things in the screen at some point in time in the chat. But it's still open for people to sign up and actually perform. So we had 10 slots that we kept for the people who did the workshop, and there's 10 slots for anybody who just wants to come and share on healing. There's so much going on in our communities right now and on our planet, and things that need to be spoken about, things that need to have space held for them. And that's what we've been trying to focus on at these workshops, and that's what we will be focusing on at the open mic. It is hosted by Droom Theater, which is a theater company here in DC who does a lot of work in the prevention and recovery space, and are just artistically, they're amazing, and they have the most energy. So please come sign up when you get there. It's going to be amazing. And now, I told you I was going to tell you who was going to be our guest next month. And so drum roll, please, I guess is what people would do, a drum roll. Our guest next month will be Fatima Asghar. So if you are not familiar, get familiar in a rush, because it's going to be an amazing, 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 amazing conversation. I use the word amazing a lot, and I'm okay with that because when I'm talking about these people in this space, it is actually an appropriate term. So please sign up for the curriculum at LMSVoice.com. And if you sign up for the curriculum, you'll be on our mailing list, which means whenever we make announcements like this, you will hear about it. We're going to have a summer series that is going to blow your mind with more writing workshops. So that's that. Other things I would like to mention is the wonderful poem from the wonderful book from our wonderful feature just became available on paperback today. And she would like you to know that, and we would like you to know that because we like to support our artists that we bring here to the space. So if you do not have it, go get 50 copies for your school, go get a couple copies for your mama, like just get it out there and continue promoting this amazing work so that we can keep having these amazing spaces. Also, this is like a LMSVoice, LMSchat exclusive. I don't know if y'all know this or not, but we were in like the room earlier, just chatting, you know how we do with Ada. And she was like, yo, guess what? I just turned in to my group of friend readers, my 6th manuscript. So the next book is coming. And now you know before anybody. Exclusive. I think if this were like a hip hop song, there'd be like a sound like bah, 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 something like that. But thank you so very much for allowing us to say that here in this space. We're super excited. And now I give you back to our amazing host and our amazing feature.
Well, I don't know if we were allowed to drop that knowledge, but wow.
Oh, I asked.
It happened. See,
yeah,
you got
I
it.
asked.
See, you
I'm
got
not
it.
that guy.
I'm not even tripping. I was like, oh, Ada.
It's like, ooh, and the interview's over.
No, it was totally fair. Totally fair.
Okay, great.
Wow. Thank you so much, Joseph.
What is?
And now
Back.
we're entering our culture section portion of the night. We're super excited. Just thought, you know, we have a poetry section and let's kind of shift it over to kind of more. Let's expand out a little bit. And so I know we talked specifically about this poem, kind of just speaking more generally, you know, like how did your environment shape the poetry that you write?
Yeah, well, I mentioned that my mother's an artist. My father was an educator. He was actually my elementary school principal, if you can imagine.
Oh my God.
I'm sure that was, you know, it was interesting. He was actually a really popular principal, thank God. That was useful. But then, and my stepfather was a writer and my stepmother was a speech pathologist. So I grew up with a lot of people that were interested in language. You know, and I'll say this, like my mother was an artist and my stepfather was a writer, but they both waited tables when I was growing up. So it wasn't like, you know, they weren't like my stepfather's not Cormac McCarthy, right? Like, but he was an amazing writer, but he waited tables and so did my mother. And so I feel like I grew up in a culture of you make art, like it may not be how you make a living, but you make art. And that was essential. And, you know, if it meant that you wrote in the mornings and waited tables in the evenings, or if it meant that you know, whatever it was that you needed to balance out your life, that's how you did it. And so I've always sort of grown up with an appreciation and a value for the art forms, for making things, whatever it is that you're making, from just the value of making things, and the importance of dreaming and imagination. And I think that was super, I mean, I can't be grateful enough for that because I know so many people didn't have that. I also say that, you know, I grew up in a family where like my grandfather from Mexico, who was marvelous, was super creative and really, I think would have been a performer, like a dancer, singer, like just was really creative. But because he crossed the border, literally like lived in a chicken coop as a child, the seriousness in which he had to take himself and the need to succeed and that to live to what we call the American dream. It was all that baggage and falseness that we know is a lie. But, you know, to do that, to the drive to do that, I think that there was this other part of me that felt like I wanted to make things also to honor him, right? To honor the people in my ancestral line that couldn't do that, that didn't have the opportunity to be told to flourish. And I think I was very early on recognized that as a gift, and recognized it that there were a lot of people that didn't have that opportunity, in particularly in my own bloodline. And so that was important to me to grow up in a way that I felt like, okay, right, like I get to do this, but not everybody gets to do this.
Right. And I'm curious now that you've told us that like you knew that you were going to do some art. I'm curious, like when you figured out that art was going to be poetry or writing, or like even if you never figured that out, and maybe I've also heard that maybe you're a visual artist. I didn't. So I'm curious, like when did you figure out what your disciplines of art were going to be?
Yeah. Okay, I was never a visual artist. I just am terrible at it. Like I think maybe it's something that like my mother, like she has that skill. And so every part of me just cannot, like,
Wow.
can't. Like I laugh that I'm always like, to this day, I'm like, Mom, teach me how to draw a tree. She's like, I've been teaching you how to draw a tree
That is so
your entire life. I'm like, I just need to know how to draw a tree. So no, I was actually a theater major in undergraduate. That was my theater. That was my major. Those were my people, and I loved it. And but in my junior year, I started taking a course on poetry, and I remembered how much I loved it in high school. And I had this moment where I thought, oh my God, all I've been studying is how to perform other people's words. And it struck me in particular in that moment, and in that time in theater school, my theater school was amazing, but it was a lot of, as you might imagine, plays by white males. And so it was like, all I was doing was, you know, performing these women that were written by men and written by white men. And then here I had this opportunity to suddenly speak my own words. And I thought, oh, everything was coming together in this way that felt, I mean, it's a weird word to say, but it felt like freedom. Like it felt like it was dislodging something in me. And I just loved it. And it wasn't until so I took 3 courses of poetry, and my advanced poetry teacher, Colleen McElroy, who was a phenomenal poet, pulled me aside and said, what are you going to do after this? And I said, I think I'm going to go to graduate school in theater. And she said, I think you should go to graduate school in poetry. And it changed my life. She was also incredibly tough. So, you know, it was like one of those, like her email was Dragon Lady at, you know, University of Washington.
Oh my God.
Like she was like so tough. So that when she said that, you took it seriously, you know? And so I actually took a year off between undergraduate and graduate school to figure out like if what she had said was really true, and then somehow got into NYU after that. And that was, I mean, I'd really only had 3 classes at school, which was kind of crazy because of course then I went to graduate school, and all of these people had literature degrees and, you know, had read everything. They're like, oh, we're not reading Milton again. And like, oh, and I was like, who's that? I was like, oh yeah, totally. What? Like writing the notes down, you know? So I still feel like there's a part of me that's playing catch up, like, you know, trying to get there. But I do have my Shakespeare down. So that's something.
One white man out of the way.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a very long answer. I apologize. I was
No.
sort of.
Did you leave theater completely behind? Do you ever tap into it still, or?
You know, it's funny. I have a lot of friends that are in theater, and they're just like amazing actors, and I get to see. It's funny. I have a couple of my friends that I acted with in high school that are on commercials and TV, and I was like, oh, there's Rachel. And but I also feel like there's, and then I have friends that are, you know, have gone on to be in movies and are actually making, you know, their lives that way. And I am so impressed by it. But there is no part of me that wants to do it. I think I see what they do and how much work it takes. And I think one of the reasons I love poetry, and this is going to sound so selfish, but is that you can do it alone.
No, that sounds.
You can totally.
There was ever a reason.
Like you can go cry in your closet and write some poems. Like you cannot do that with theater, you know.
You know, you talk a lot about how you changed careers and you started focusing on poetry. You know, now as an instructor, you know, how do you bring your identity as a poet into the classroom?
You know, I think what I try to do the most is, in fact, I have like these 3 things that I say to myself before I teach. Because I used to never want to teach because I have seen myself as a student, and I always want to think of myself as a student. I always want to think of myself as a learner, and I am the master of absolutely nothing. So I tell myself 3 things, and the first thing I tell myself is enjoy this, and then I say be enthusiastic, right? Like enjoy this, be enthusiastic, and then model what you talk about. So if I'm telling them like, okay, here's what we want to like do, and we talk about poems, it's like I'm going to bring in poems that I love, and I'm going to be completely honest in my feedback about those works. And I'm always enthusiastic about poetry, and it's just to be really present, to be really in the room. And I think it's very easy to not be, because we're all so swamped and so busy and so full of what's next. And I really just try to take a deep breath and be like, okay, I'm in this room. I'm in this now. We have this moment, and what a joy. I get to teach poetry. Like, I don't teach all the time, but when I do, I really, really enjoy it. And I think partly it's because, it's poetry. Like, if you get to talk about poetry, I would be the worst like math professor ever. I would just be like, oh, this is so terrible. But I get so excited sometimes, like I'm shouting at the screen, at the end, it's like my neck is sore and they're like, take it easy, And I'm like, but then he does this and he turns into the horse, and they're like, okay. So yeah, no, I think it's modeling the behavior of like what it is to be an artist in the world. And I'm also like, I'm honest with how I am, with how I'm doing, not in a way that, feels, I think, gratuitous, but just in a way that feels like, let's all check in with each other. Because I think, in order to make art, especially in a workshop setting, you have to feel like you can trust those around you, and you can trust. I always, my students know me as a benevolent dictator.
What a phrase. What a phrase.
Yeah, that sounds kind of like, a part of me is like, I want to hear from the students. It's like, yeah, our benevolent dictator. Oh,
it's a firm hand, right? Like it's a firm hand. But I also, it's like that idea of like, I've never really been into like the Iowa model, or that the sort of like the student run thing. I'm like, no. Because in my opinion, I would like to support my students in a way that makes them feel protected and safe. And it's that you can't really do that if you're just letting the students negotiate for themselves the power dynamic of the classroom.
Well said.
As a student of poetry, I feel like as a student, I think a lot of times I do, like in workshops, like look to teachers to not only be like the teacher, but like like everything runs through, whoever my teacher is at the time, because I feel like I think that I like the way you put it as like being safe, but I feel like it's even more than that. I don't know. Like, I feel like even like the creativity, the ideas, like like sometimes the way you see your teacher respond is like how you understand like what is welcome here.
Yeah. Yeah. And what, like, I mean, what it is to be a living artist in the world, right? Like, I like for them to know that I'm writing. Like, I like for them to know that, like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this prompt with you. I'm going to share what I wrote. Like, I taught a class at Stanford and I gave them prompts. And then one week I was like, okay, I told you I was going to share. Here's mine. And, I'd written it that morning and I was like, I'm going to share it. But I feel like there's a lot of that kind of like, I want them to know that I'm doing the work and that it's not just about, the idea of teaching, right? But actually learning in the same vein.
I can only imagine how much your students appreciate you.
I hope so. I adore them.
I feel like I really want to, if you're a Ada Limon student in the chat, just blink twice if if the benevolent dictator is going too far.
So, I think we have arrived to our final and I think most favorite section of the night, and we're now titling it the Chop It Up section. And it's when we kind of ask just kind of like fun, lighthearted questions, and sometimes they're major debates, and sometimes it's just whatever we're feeling. So I think the first question I want to start us off with, is what is something you picked up in quarantine that you didn't want to do? Or that you didn't want to?
That I didn't want to.
Just like
or unexpected more.
Wait, so something that I picked up in quarantine.
Yes, a hobby, a habit, maybe something.
Like a bad habit, or
it can be whatever. Bad habit
surprised me. Oh, okay. Let's see. I think something that has surprised me in quarantine, and that is that I'm really good at being alone. Like, almost, it's a little scary.
That's good. As things open up, are you now like, why?
Yeah.
Let's just stay inside.
100%. Yeah.
No, so
oh
crazy.
yeah, there's a big part of me that's like, you want me to go to your house? Like, okay.
Let's Zoom. Let's set up a.
Give me a couple of weeks to think about that. So yeah, I think my someone said big introvert energy. Yes, that has taken me a little aback. Even my husband's like, you don't even go to the store. I'm like, but they can deliver. So yeah, they're gonna have to like, pull me out of the house like gum out of the hair at the end of this. So we'll see if I leave.
Word. If in a year Ada Limon is still in the same living room, we'll know.
You may have to come and get me.
Okay. The next question we have, a little bit polarizing. Is water wet?
Oh, water is definitely wet. Yeah.
You heard it here first. Water is wet. And I imagine in the chat it's about to light up, but I think for now we can just leave it. Water is wet, period. Full stop. Milka, do we have one more?
Yes, we do. And our last question, just basics, if you had to eat one meal for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Ooh.
I like to also add with this, you're going to get all your nutrition from this meal. So you don't have to worry about that. This meal is everything you need it to be, but it's only that meal forever.
Yeah. I mean, like tacos. It's always going to be tacos.
That's a good choice. But whatever you want in tacos.
I mean, you can make a taco bowl, if you don't want the tortilla, you can just do lots of things, but like, let's just say tacos for the rest of my life.
That's a solid choice.
And you can have them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Breakfast tacos are amazing.
Great portions. I think you just changed my choice.
My choice still isn't tacos.
Yeah.
But tacos are great. Yeah, and somebody added in the chat, and dessert tacos.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about dessert tacos. Wow.
Joseph, you're back. So I think
Yeah, I
that's
just pop up, you know, when there's 2 minutes left. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I just want to make sure that we have enough time for you all to make your final goodbyes and say what you want to say at the end. And for our amazing feature to give a final statement or say something that she wants people to know about that's going on. We definitely mentioned her paperback book, but if there's anything else you want to say or just like love to the people, I just want to get y'all going down that path. So go ahead.
Word. We mentioned The Carrying, which is a book you should go buy, but also it is the 15th anniversary of Lucky Wreck, which Ada, is that your first book of poetry? Very first book of poetry. So there's a 15th anniversary edition of it. We will put that in the chat. Go purchase it because 15 only comes once, you know what I'm saying? And then, you know, then in 30 years from now, you'll be like, I had the 15 and I got the 30 and I put them together. That's a whatever that is. That is a that. So go do that. And also has a bunch of other books. We will put social media in the chat as well. Milka, am I forgetting anything?
I think you got everything. I wasn't sure, Ada, if you had any last words you wanted to send us off with.
No, just thank you so much. It was a marvelous conversation. I really enjoyed just talking about one poem. What a great idea. I loved the whole setup and I really appreciated all of the questions and the energy you brought to this. So thank you.
Yeah, you just reminded me, everything you said was gold. You should add a new profession to your talents, because I wish I had a pen and paper to write everything down.
Milka is shook. Milka,
I'm shook.
Milka.
Shout out to Brian Hannon, sitting in the dark, only nose up. The idea for LMSchat was definitely his. And he is the man behind the curriculum that birthed all of this. So thank you, Mr. Hannon, chilling in the dark. We appreciate you. We're going to get you a new lamp that shines light on you. He said he has 3 lights on, but I don't believe it. But thank you. And thank you, Ada. Thank you to our marvelous hosts. Please give them a round of applause. Love in the chat. We finally figured out how to transcribe these things, so we will have them up on the LMSVoice website. Safia, Rashid, Patricia Smith, and Ada by the end of the week. So please come back and share with other folks. Have a good night. Take care of yourselves. Happy Poetry Month.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.